The Secrets of Doctor Who is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, episode 183.
One day, I shall come back.
That's it. I've been renewed.
Is when a Time Lord's body wears out, he regenerates.
I'm a Time Lord. I'm not a human being. I walk in eternity.
Braveheart.
Change, my dear, and it seems on a moment too soon.
Unlimited rice pudding.
Physician healers. Wearing a bit thin. Fantastic.
I am Scottish. I can complain about things.
Ta-da! Ooh. Should be fine.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the fourth Doctor story, Planet of Evil. Joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Very well, thanks. Folks, please, if you have not yet done so, make sure to subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, your favorite podcast app, or at the SQPN YouTube channel, where you should also make sure to hit the bell to get notifications. So, as I said, we're talking about the fourth Doctor story called Planet of Evil. This is aired in September of 1975. It's the Doctor's second season. His companion is still Sarah Jane. In fact, it's the first story where it's just Sarah Jane and not Harry.
Because we dropped off Harry in Scotland.
Yes.
He didn't trust the Doctor to get him back to London 5 minutes before they left, and he was right to do so.
What a shock.
Yes, Harry was right as usual. And, this is a 4-part serial, as they often are at this time in the Doctor Who series. So the basic recap in this is the Doctor and Sarah are at the edge of the universe. Instead of being 5 minutes before they left in London, they are 30,000 years later at the edge of the universe, where the Doctor picks up a distress call, and they find themselves on a planet called Zeta Minor, where a geological team has run afoul of something very strange.
And this series is basically Forbidden Planet that then later turns into Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Exactly.
And I identified both of those in my notes, and then when I looked at the TARDIS wiki, it said, this episode is inspired by Forbidden Planet and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's like, no duh.
Yeah, it's not even subtly that way, yes. It takes place mostly on the planet in this jungle. And I have to say, they do a good job with the set design on this one. I mean, it's still 1975, and so you get that quality. But for the time, this is a pretty verdant, big, messy jungle.
And an alien one, too. The jungle set is the best thing about this episode. For any TV jungle, they really pulled out all the stops on this. You have, even though it's set in a studio, you have like places where the floor of the jungle is liquid. So instead of just having a concrete floor, it's got water and people are splashing around in the water. And it's got all these alien plants and that look, they clearly did not just drag this out of stock, out of the props department. They made this, and it's very dense. It's better than Star Trek jungles.
Yes. Star Trek sets. So I mean, it's the infamous big foam rock. Is usually what Star Trek looked like, unless they were like later on they would go onto location, in some park in Los Angeles, like on Shore Leave, that episode. Yeah. Otherwise, it was just like big foam rocks on a soundstage with
rubber tree plants that people run through.
Yeah,
exactly.
They must have had to haul in a bunch of dirt too, because there's like piles of dirt that they're climbing over, and I mean, they
went all out. It did remind me a bit of the fire swamp in Princess Bride, if you remember that. So there was a bit of that. So you have this misty jungle. We open on this misty jungle, and there's a metal structure, a building, a man-made structure of some kind, and we have this very interesting sort of pre-credit sequence where this guy comes out. He looks bedraggled. He plants a grave marker next to other grave markers. So obviously, whoever these people are, there have been people dying here.
And I like, without saying it on screen, they tell us it's the year 3177, or
Yes.
is just because it's on the grave marker, so we know
That's
exactly
right.
when we are.
Luckily, English has not changed. And then we have two men in a cave collecting some type of geological specimens, some
Broken
crystals.
glass. They're getting broken glass off the floor.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you got to clean up the broken glass. You don't want to get a cut. One of them, we'll find out his name is Professor Sorensen. He says that he claims that the planet is alive, and he's obviously a little bit on the edge of mental health. Just say that. That's his point. He believes that the planet is alive and trying to hide this ore, this glass that they're collecting, from them. If they don't collect it now, it won't be here later. It's trying to trick us.
So now we've got the crazy scientist who's going to set up the conflict later, because of course that's such a trope in Doctor Who. It's not even funny.
Oh, and we haven't even hit the major trope for this episode. Yeah.
No.
Right.
But meanwhile, Brown, the guy who has been talking to them over the phone, who set the grave marker, he's suddenly attacked by an outline of the invisible monster from Forbidden Planet,
Right.
and disappears. And
Yes, he collapses to the ground and he just disappears off screen.
Yeah, but he'll be back, or at least his desiccated corpse will.
Yes, the other guy who was with Professor, they had to be back before dark. Otherwise the big bad wolf gets you. But the professor wouldn't leave, so this guy said, "Well, you're on your own. I'm heading back." And so when he gets back,
same thing happens to him.
The same thing inside the structure. So that's our open. Like, what's going on here? So then we cut to the doctor and Sarah Jane in the TARDIS, and she tells him he's reneging on his promise to take her back to London 5 minutes before they left, and he's being all snippy about it because she's right.
And she's having fun giving him grief about it.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is incidentally the first time we've seen Tom Baker in control of the TARDIS. Previously in his stories, we either haven't been inside the TARDIS or haven't seen him working the controls.
Right, that's interesting. All the way into this his second season, yeah. And they receive this distress call from this planet Zeta Minor, and the doctor eagerly says, "Stand by for emergency materialization." He seems very excited to get this distraction from his failure to get her back to London. And then once they're on the planet, they're trying to find the source of the distress signal. And while they're climbing through the jungle, Sarah Jane hears the same noise that the guy Brown did before, but instead of dying and disappearing, she goes rigid for some reason. We don't ever really get an explanation for why Sarah Jane is affected differently, do we?
No, but she says she feels like she's being drawn out of her body.
Right.
But she never really gets drawn out of her body. She's just she's having an abstraction for a minute.
And meanwhile, a ship enters orbit, and this crew who have these fabulous costumes, these blue with the white piping on them.
I was going to say the ship looks like a cast-off Starfleet vessel. It's got similar design.
Yes, it does.
And a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, a vacuum cleaner. They in dialogue they explain that this is Zeta Minor, the last planet in the known universe. I'm thinking last as in others are all gone, or just on the edge of the universe. But
it seems it seems to be edge from what they say. Like when Sarah Jane later says she's from Earth, it's like, oh, well, that's over this other galaxy and beyond that galaxy and so forth. So I interpreted this as the farthest extent spatially, the farthest mapped planet in the known universe.
On the maps beyond this planet, it says, "Here there be dragons."
Yes, exactly. Invisible dragon monster. So they're there because they're looking for this expedition on the planet that hasn't reported in months. So they come to check on them. Meanwhile, Sarah Jane has recovered, and they find Brown's the guy from the structure, his desiccated body outside. And they say, "Oh, it looks like he's been dead for months," but it's only been minutes, right? That he's been dead. So how could that be? Inside, the power of the structure has been drained. All the power systems have been drained, and so that the doctor is going to try to get power back up and running, while Sarah Jane runs back to the TARDIS for a spectrometer. And I'm thinking,
a spectromixer.
I'm sorry. Yes, I substituted real scientific instrument for science fiction science instrument.
And by spectromixer, they mean astrolabe.
Right.
Because all they're going to do is take a Starfix with it.
Yes. And there's an interesting little back and forth about the TARDIS key. Apparently, the Doctor's been stingy with his TARDIS keys with his companions at this point. That she doesn't have one.
Yeah, he doesn't hand them out the same way he does in New Who.
Yeah. It's interesting. So once she's back to the TARDIS, the men from the spaceship have beamed down, or whatever it is they do, and they decide to transport the TARDIS up to their ship. So they hook some stuff up to it while she's still inside. And at the same time, the professor is watching them from the bushes nearby. He doesn't trust them, so he's still a little unbalanced. But when they do find him, he tells them that the mission's a success, even though everybody else is dead. The mission is a success. And then they find the Doctor standing over dead bodies and immediately assume that he killed everybody somehow.
And this sets up the most common, this is one of the single most common Doctor Who tropes, is the Doctor and companions stumble into a situation and are blamed for something bad that's happening. Then you have a split among the people who are blaming them, where you have one person who is irrationally convinced that they're to blame and wants to kill them. And in that case, it's the controller of the Marestran space probe ship. And then you have somebody else, and like a counselor in this trope, who is not convinced that the Doctor is responsible for the bad thing. And so that's the exact plot line that plays out now. You have the Marestran controller convinced that the Doctor and Sarah Jane are killing people, and so they need to be executed immediately. And the advisor to the Marestran controller, a guy named Wyszynski, is not convinced that they are responsible. And so we have this regular back and forth between kill them, no, we don't have proof, and respect my authority, and all this kind of stuff.
So the controller, which is the equivalent of captain, I suppose, Salamar, is so over the top. But it's so funny. He's blown like the wind. You know what I mean? Like he just like a windsock. It's he's completely convinced of opposite things at the merest hint of coincidental evidence. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah, he also is. Other people keep making suggestions or issuing or say, "Let's do this," and he'll hop on it. It's like, "Wait, I'm the controller," and nobody does anything until I say it, and then he gives the same order anyway. And it happens over and over again. He's like, he's very, very respect my authority, but then he gives in to whatever other people are saying.
Well, it was funny to watch because I was thinking of, kind of like the military, where the controller was the young, second lieutenant, first lieutenant, who really doesn't have a lot of experience.
Yes.
And then Vyszynski is the, senior NCO. He's been in the military for before this guy was even born. He knows everything that's going on. And he's there going, okay, dude, you got to listen to me. I know you're the one in charge. I'm the one who knows what's going on. And of course, that's what it ends up being in the end.
You're a 22-year-old second lieutenant, and I'm a sergeant major who's been in the military before you were born. Yeah, I mean that's
exactly. I mean that's exactly the dialogue here, where Vyszynski's like, "We got to do this," and the controller immediately jumps down his throat, but then gets convinced to do it anyways.
It's very much a typical like tin pot dictator. Like if you give a guy a little bit of authority, he's gonna hold on to it as much as he can, and that's what it feels like. Meanwhile, back in the cave where Sorensen was collecting glass, something is alive in this pool of water, this inky black pool that's in there.
If it's a pool of water, it's kind of inconsistent. Yeah. At one point, Sarah Jane describes it as a pool, but the Doctor points out you can't see your reflection in it, which is creepy. But then it also, people just fall into it like it's just a pit. Yes. So I was unclear, is this supposed to be a pool or a pit? It's kind of both.
Yes. Yeah. So Sarah Jane and the Doctor are brought together into the structure. She's brought down from they landed the spacecraft. She's brought over to the structure. They're imprisoned in this room. These guys are like the worst guards ever, because they're thrown in this room together. And she comes up. By the way, she comes up with the idea of escape out the window, because the Doctor's forgotten that the power is low, and so whatever keeps the windows locked isn't working, so they go out the window.
Well, that's one thing I did like in this is there are a couple of points where Sarah Jane gets to be the clever one.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because the doctors, she goes, well, let's sneak out. And the doctor's, how are we going to do that? The window? Hello.
Well, in fact, Sarah Jane feels a lot like the modern New Who companions, at least, especially in this, but in other times. I mean, she's probably the most like modern New Who that I've seen so far.
And that's why after Jamie left the show, she was the most popular companion of the classic era.
Right.
You know,
right.
but it is interesting to go back and watch these shows, having watched now 12 seasons of New Who, and it's some of the old companions were known for being shrieky. You know, their job was there to look good on screen and shriek.
Yeah.
But the more you watch these old companions, they're not quite that. I mean, there's a lot of them that were, you know, we kind of laugh about the second Doctor and you know, oh, go make some tea. Oh, okay, Doctor, you know, just kind of get fluffed off. But a lot of the companions, they actually did stand on their own quite a bit. Of course, then we can talk about Leela, who just basically runs things. Right.
So the first episode of these 4 episodes ends with this
outline menacing the Doctor and Sarah.
Yes, this partially invisible creature, as I wrote, approaching them. So as they're outside the structure, and then this sentry comes along as the next episode begins. Sentry comes along and shoots at it, which draws its attention to him, letting the Doctor and Sarah get away, and he dies, obviously.
One thing I like about the guns that these guys are using, and other energy weapons, but instead of the classic beams that you would see like from a phaser or something, it's like a flash of light, and it causes a flash of light where it's being aimed. And it's a nice change in the special effect from the standard special effect we're used to seeing.
It's not only is it more accurate to what a laser actually looks like, you don't actually usually see a laser beam, you just see the effect. Mm-hmm. It's also a lot cheaper to
it's a lot cheaper.
You just have little flashes.
Bulb.
Yeah, exactly. They have to rotoscope in the phaser blast. So Sarah Jane tells the Doctor that when they saw this creature, she felt like she did before, so it's connected. And then the creature also is apparently draining power from the structure, so that's where that went. So the Morestrians come along, and they think that the Doctor and Sarah, that's what they're called, Morestrians, I didn't mention before. They think the Doctor and Sarah killed the sentry now because, you know, they were seen near the body. They have such bad luck. They keep standing over dead bodies.
I want to mention, too, that one of the guards or one of the soldiers is Ponty. And Ponty was played by Lewis Mahoney, who was the elder Billy Shipton in Blink.
Oh, yeah. In bed, he's the one. He's
the one that was in the hospital dying because the angel sucked him back in time, and then he lived his life.
Oh,
and then died in bed shortly after.
That's why he looked familiar. Very interesting. Yeah.
And I only mentioned him because he's the next one to die. But
poor Ponty. So in the jungle, this invisible thing passes the Doctor and Sarah by for some reason. And then he begins to quote Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, basically to say that the creature doesn't like daylight. You just get this long quote. Yeah. And then he talks about how he met Shakespeare. So the Doctor's met Shakespeare a few times, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, the Morestrians decide to send out a drone to track the Doctor and Sarah.
An oculoid, and it's called an oculoid because it's got a big eyeball on the front.
Looks like a cat's eye, yeah.
It's very literal.
It's always fun for me to just, okay, we have a word for this now. It's just a drone. You know, send up a drone, and they're looking for them. We also get some backstory on why the broken glass is so important to Professor Sorensen.
Right.
It's that their solar system is dependent on a dying sun.
Right.
And I'm like, you have spaceships.
Go elsewhere.
Move. You know? But no, instead of evacuating their solar system to somewhere else, Professor Sorensen is out here looking for broken glass so they can power up their sun again.
Yes, that would be handy. So, meanwhile, the drone is tracking the Doctor and Sarah. It's loud enough that anyone should be able to avoid being seen by it, but they don't.
Yeah.
But they show up at the cave with the strange pool.
At the no reflection pool.
The no reflect.
Yeah.
Yes, where the something related to the creature. The Monestrans show up and they take the Doctor into custody. But in the struggle, this is when poor Ponty falls into the pool hole abyss. Then there's tension between Professor Sorensen and the controller Salamar. Sorensen, claims to have connections in high places, and the controller insists this is a military mission, and we have 7 deaths to investigate and execute the bad guys that we've captured so far.
Yet another meme for Doctor Who: the civilian scientist versus the military.
Yes. The Doctor then does some more exposition that tells us that Zeta Minor, the planet, is the boundary between the universe we know and an anti-universe, an antimatter universe, and tells Sorensen that they're not allowed to take any samples from the planet.
And not just because the samples are intrinsically dangerous, but because they won't be allowed to. It's like the outline creature on the planet is made of antimatter and wants all of its broken glass antimatter babies on the planet with it.
Right.
And will not let the ship leave.
Yes.
But Sorensen really wants to head out of there because all the broken glass he's got in the thermos bottles, he says 6 pounds of that will power their sun for 300 years.
That's some pretty potent stuff, I have to say.
Yeah.
That would be good.
And I didn't run the math on would 6 pounds of antimatter really do that. It might. But the science about antimatter in this episode is really silly.
Well, yes.
It's basic. They don't really the writers don't really understand what antimatter is. They even mentioned that if it comes into contact with matter, it annihilates.
Yes. And then they hold it in their hand.
Yeah, we don't see that happening. So,
well, the Doctor takes like a regular spoon and like pushes, shovels some out onto the regular countertop and pours this fluid on it, and it does nothing.
Yeah. So, the Doctor and Sarah are locked into the quarantine room with the samples and the TARDIS, which, if they think it's their spaceship, if the Monestrans think this is the Doctor's spaceship, why would you put him in there with... never mind.
We do get a nice discussion, though, of why they don't just leave.
Right.
Because
I was going to say,
Sarah says, let's just get out of here. And the Doctor's like, no, it's tempting to let them kill themselves with the antimatter, but it won't just be them. It will destroy the universe. Dum, dum, dum. So we have to stay.
Yes. High stakes. We have high stakes now.
Yep.
So as they try to launch the ship from the surface, they have a power drain, and the alien creature is approaching now. And so all the red shirts go out to get killed, and they don't really have red shirts, but that's essentially what they are. And they have to follow the Doctor's suggestion, which is to superpower the force fields by, connecting to some atomic thing. The Doctor then proposes that they leave the samples behind, and he'll go communicate with the creature to convince it to let them go.
He's going to negotiate with the outline.
Yes, so he goes to the pool, but while he's at the cave pool abyss, the creature emerges and the Doctor falls in. Oh, that's terrible. So everyone assumes that's where the second episode ends, and the third episode begins with everyone assuming the Doctor is dead.
Yeah, but he's really falling down to Lidsville.
Lidsville?
Yeah, that was a live action Saturday morning television program when I was a kid. It starred Butch Patrick from the Munsters.
Uh-huh.
And it was made by Sid and Marty Krofft, and it was about a magical town where everyone was a hat. And so there was like a football hat and a football helmet and a pirate hat and a chef's hat. And this boy from our world named Mark followed the magician Charles Nelson Riley into his backstage room. And,
Never follow.
And the magician's hat grew enormous. And Mark falls into the hat in the opening credits of every episode and he's falling and falling down in this dark void until he gets to Lidsville. And so that's what's happening to the Doctor. He's heading down to Lidsville now. And, Lidsville is the kookiest, Lidsville is the grooviest, Lidsville is the living end. And if you ever go to Lidsville, you'll be glad you did, 'cause everyone who goes to Lidsville really flips his lid.
How's that for a topper?
Jimmy never forgets
drugs?
anything.
how many and what kind of drugs were involved in everything the Crofts were involved in?
I was going to say that.
It was a lot, apparently. This was after H.R. Puffin stuff.
I was big about H.R. Puffin. I was thinking maybe they were falling to the land of the lost with the Sleestaks, but there's that too, yeah. So, yes, they've assumed that the doctor is dead instead of going to Lidsville. The controller and Sorensen argue over whether to leave the samples behind, of course, while Sarah Jane slips out to go find the doctor. She goes to the doctor's falling through the vortex between worlds until he runs into the energy creature there. And Sorensen then sneaks into the quarantine room to save one of his sample containers before the rest of it can be tossed out the airlock. Sarah Jane comes to the pool in time to pull the doctor out. I'm thinking, where's poor Ponty? Is he still in the vortex falling?
Well, they explain that, kind of, because before he left, the doctor took a bunch of the broken glass and put it in a toffee tin.
Right.
And when he gets back, he turns over the broken glass, and there's like, you had the antimatter? It's like, yeah, how do you think I survived the fall into Lidsville?
Right.
And so it was because Ponty didn't have any of the broken glass that he didn't survive, apparently.
Yes, that's it. So Wyszynski, the XO or counselor, he ends up stopping the takeoff procedure when he sees that the doctor is alive because the eyeball drone is still watching. And he goes out to bring him back despite the controller's objection. So he's disobeying the Tin Pot Dictator's orders. Meanwhile, Sorensen is examining the crystals in his quarters, and as they glow red, his eyes start to glow red too.
Yeah.
This is where we're shifting from Forbidden Planet to Jekyll and Hyde.
And he gets really thirsty for this dry ice coffee that he likes to drink. It's coffee. He pours it into a coffee mug. It looks like coffee, but then there's this dry ice mist that comes up. And he's really thirsty for that. And I thought that this is connected to the fact that all of the corpses, when they cease being invisible, are desiccated. Yes. Because they made a big deal that the water is sucked out of them. So I thought he's chugging this coffee because he's thirsty, because he's now infected by antimatter, and so he needs extra fluids.
Right.
But it turns out that's not the case. We later find out that this is a medicine that he's come up with for himself to protect himself from anti-quark penetration. So it's something he's chugging this stuff to keep protecting himself from the antimatter.
Right. There's a whole lot of, this is one of the issues with this story, is we have a whole lot of these things in different directions, desiccated bodies, this stuff that he's going to take for anti-quark, and I guess kind of wish they had settled on one thing and just gone with it, but there's a whole lot of stuff going on. So the doctor is unconscious and he's brought to sickbay on a stretcher, and they try to take off again, but it doesn't work. The doctor thinks it's because he had that little tin of antimatter in his pocket, but it really the Sorensen's sample jar that he has.
It's both.
Well, it's both, right? But the crewman who's tasked with jettisoning the doctor's little sample thing is attacked by Sorensen and killed the same way the others are. He's got all the moisture sucked out of him.
So you don't have to be an outline to be a moisture vampire.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, this is like an episode of Star Trek. So Sorensen, meanwhile, is turning into Mr. Hyde, and he tries to implicate the doctor and Sarah in the killing in order to deflect attention from himself. Like, if someone's dying on board, it must be the aliens, as they refer to them.
I think that he's sincere about that. I think he doesn't realize that he's the problem.
Okay. I mean, that's possible given the circumstances.
What I really like, though, is after Morelli has been killed, despite his Italian name,
yes,
we have his burial at space, and Wyszynski says, what was his denomination? He was Morastian Orthodox. Oh, one of those. Okay, so they start playing tapes. They start playing funeral rite tapes. It's like, we may have to play the last rites, but we don't have to listen to them, and he pots them down.
Yes. I thought it was an interesting addition to the story, is this religious observance here.
Exactly.
But yes, the idea is that they can have the last rites from the body. That's why they would need to find out why. And we see an image of the body being ejected into space, a little burial at sea sort of image there. This is right after the autopsy to determine, yes, he was killed in the same way as the others.
And since they've gone to the trouble to have the props department build a port for ejecting things into space, we're going to get to see that port used for ejecting other things into space.
If you're going to have Yes, it's the Chekhov's ejection port. So the controller, he seems to, like I said before, an easily led fool who shifts blame wherever someone points him. So the doctor asks Sorensen if he ever considered, if he's wrong, that there's no way to exploit anti-quark energy to repower the sun. And the Sorensen seems baffled that he would be wrong on this. So the controller takes the doctor to the TARDIS, leaving Sarah with Sorensen, but Sorensen starts to transform again into Hyde, which causes Sarah to go rigid again. Again, not much explanation on that, but
yeah.
But he leaves and goes and kills one of the red shirts.
And also the doctor gives us a name for our monster of the week now. Sorensen has become Anti-Man.
Yes. When he comes back and finds Sarah, he will identify him as Anti-Man, which I enjoy that. Because he hears Sarah scream and comes running back. I do like the fact that the Sarah screaming while the doctor in Salamar in the quarantine room gives the doctor the opportunity to, now that Salamar's distracted, to clock him one and knock him out.
Yeah,
which is great. So that was good. So the controller, meanwhile, recovers and comes back and shoots the doctor with his phaser beam.
And from what we can tell, based on the effects of these things on people, they're basically stun guns.
Yeah, they don't seem very effective at all for really causing violence. So he orders them both to be spaced, thrown out in the ejection port. Wyszynski objects, but Sorensen, meanwhile, is too far gone to even be coherent. And that brings us to the fourth episode in this serial. The pilot is on the command deck, and he gets attacked by a creature,
an outline,
which sends everyone running to the bridge. And Wyszynski says, "Well, we can't eject the doctor and Sarah now. Obviously, they weren't the ones responsible for killing this guy. They were in the ejection port, ready to go." And he takes command from the controller, who says, "Wait for it. You'll regret this." I mean, that's they always say, like, "I'm taking command from you. You'll regret this," which they never do, because they're always right to take command from the crazy captain. The doctor realizes that the Anti-Man is Sorensen, and so he's going to go confront him, while Sarah tells Wyszynski to shut all the hatches, all the emergency bulkhead hatches, which are spaced every 3 feet in the corridor, which, I mean, this is a real secure ship. You don't want any air getting out more than you can. The now ex-controller thinks it's preposterous that Sorensen is behind any of this and proving himself to be an idiot. We finally see the doctor using the sonic screwdriver that makes an appearance here to get into Sorensen's quarters, and he finds the crystals and the red liquid that Sorensen's been drinking and tests it on the crystals.
He takes some of the dry ice coffee and puts it on the broken glass, and it causes it to shine. And the doctor
and turn brown.
Yeah, they don't explain this with exposition at the time, but in hindsight, that's what tells the doctor that Sorensen's coffee is up to protect him from anti-quark penetration, but it's not working because when he put it on the broken glass, it shined light. And so I kind of actually like the subtlety of how we just see the doctor do this, and only later, and without a lot of explanation, its purpose becomes clear.
Right. When Sorensen comes in, he basically tells him that, what you're doing isn't saving yourself, it's making it inevitable. You're actually accelerating the process. And he convinces him to take the crystals that he's been hoarding and do the right thing.
Yeah, by which he means eject yourself and your broken glass into space.
Yeah.
Yes, because he's now infected with the antimatter, so he has to go too. But before we get to that, meanwhile, the Salamar loses his cool, grabs something dangerous,
a
something
neutron
that
accelerator.
Yes, which just has to be laying around on the bridge, and plans to kill himself with Sorensen to demonstrate real leadership. Like, dude, go.
Which, of course, is going to go well. No.
Yeah. This guy has been a disaster as a leader this entire time. Sorensen, meanwhile, gets into the ejection tray in sickbay, that ejection port, and just as he is about to hit the lever to send himself out into space, he transforms into Mr. Jekyll again, and that's too late. So Salamar heads to the quarantine room where Sorensen is, and he's planning to use the neutron accelerator on Sorensen. But again, he makes the critical error, and it has the wrong effect.
So
and
he dies, and we now have multiple outline creatures of Sorensen running around.
Yes, it created copies of him. So the Anti-Man has multiplied, and so the Doctor goes to the quarantine room where he shoots Sorensen and drags him into the TARDIS.
Oh, and Sorensen at this point, as Mr. Hyde, they try to change his appearance. They give him different makeup and stuff, and that's fine. But now that he's like totally become Anti-Man, he's so comical. He's lumbering around,
Yeah.
and he's sticking out in and out his tongue. It's like, bleh, and it looks just ridiculous.
It is, yeah. It's a little over the top. So the Doctor restrains Sorensen with some wrist and ankle restraints that he happened to have lying around on the TARDIS, and it takes him off the ship. So he takes the TARDIS off the ship back to the planet. He doesn't seem to like. So I didn't mention the ship is trying to escape from the planet, but because of the antimatter on it, it's being pulled back, and so it's not able to make escape velocity or just to get away. It's being pulled
the antimatter
back.
is acting like almost like a rubber band, where you've reached the end of the rubber band, and it's either going to snap back or break. Yes,
as the Doctor says, we'll go back faster and faster until, of course, we reach the surface. At which point we'll stop with a bang. Which that was a nice understatement. But yeah, he takes Sorensen off and doesn't seem to be concerned at this point with the ship crashing. The restraints don't hold Sorensen, of course, and so the Doctor has to lure him outside to the antimatter pool on the planet, where he knocks him in. That causes the creatures on the ship to disappear, and for the ship to start pulling away from the planet, so that all the antimatter is gone. Meanwhile, Sorensen's not dead. He actually reappears next to the pool, this time without the bad wig and the sticking out tonguey bits. He's back in his normal form. And the TARDIS, the Doctor and he take off in the TARDIS just as the big antimatter creature, the visible outline, rises from the pool. And we are told to let Sorensen go because the Doctor kept his promise to return all the antimatter.
He gave his word as a Time Lord to it that they would give back all the broken glass.
And all the glass. So back on the ship, the Doctor ends up redirecting Sorensen from his previous research into broken glass.
And this is great.
It tells him to harvest energy from the kinetic movement of planets.
To power your sun. Yeah.
Yes. To power your sun from
planets
from orbiting
don't
planets.
generate quite enough kinetic energy to power a sun.
Yeah. Well, probably not 6 pounds of antimatter either, but that's entirely possible. And that's where we end. My assessment of this, there are aspects of this that were okay. I like Sarah Jane in this. She wasn't at all screechy. Wyszynski actually ended up being kind of a cool character. Some of the secondary characters had some interesting moments, like the guy complaining about having to carry things in and out of the ship all the time. Carry it in, carry it out, carry it out. That was kind of funny.
It felt like Robert Holmes, maybe as script editor, was doing that.
Yeah, that might have been
kind of a Robert Holmes thing, to have the working man, complaining about stuff.
Yeah. So I kind of felt like that. Though, so I like those bits, but the Salamar, the controller, was just really annoying, and there were a lot of holes in the plot of this one. As Tolkien said, too much bread and too little butter. So, but I'll leave it to you guys. What's your assessment, Father Cory?
I kind of agree. I like the description of it. This is kind of a stereotypical paint by numbers classic Who episode.
Yeah,
I mean, we talked about the tropes, all the things, the military and the civilian, the crazy scientist and all that stuff. It's like this is especially during the third and fourth Doctors. This is paint by numbers,
right?
There's even a moment early on where they're in the base on the planet, and they actually talk about the fact that we're now a base under siege.
Right. There is actually a nice moment where the Doctor quotes Lawrence Oates of the Scott Expedition of the South Pole, where he has famous line, "I'm just going outside and may be sometime," which
he never came back.
If you don't understand the reference, that guy never came back. And that's what the Doctor's saying. I might not come back. It's the typical understatement.
I enjoyed this. Now, so one of the things that the TARDIS Wiki pointed out is you could think of this as Philip Hinchcliffe's first real episode, because even though Philip Hinchcliffe had produced a few of the prior episodes, they had been commissioned by his predecessors. Right. And so this was the first story that he gave story approval to. And it really sets kind of the tone for the Philip Hinchcliffe era, because Philip Hinchcliffe and Robert Holmes wanted to take the show in a much darker, more atmospheric direction, very gothic. And that gothic aesthetic is going to predominate on the show. And it's going to get him in trouble with Mary Whitehouse. But this episode really has that. My notes are a little slow but atmospheric. And the dark, creepy, weird alien jungle really sells that, and the lurking horror of the outlines and Anti-Man. I mean, so Forbidden Planet is based on The Tempest, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a piece of gothic fiction. And so you can see how those kind of elements are creeping in here, and they're going to become much more prominent. In fact, our next Tom Baker episode in sequence, I'm not sure whether we're covering it next in our reviews, but our next Tom Baker episode in sequence is The Pyramids of Mars,
right? Which
is another really dark gothic. I mean, it's set in a gothic mansion with a priest hole and everything.
Yeah, yep. And we've done like Horror at Fang Rock already, which is later than this, and that's very much gothic. It's interesting too that as gothic, as dark as they went, they apparently pulled back a little on some of the darker elements by having Sorensen reappear next to the pool. Originally, I think they were going to have him just die. He's thrown in and be dead. But having him come back because they thought that maybe it was too much for a kid's show to have him die. So, but not too much for the red shirt, I guess. Any other notes on this episode from you there? All right. So we should probably wrap things up there. We do have some feedback that we got from our episode where we talked about Russell T. Davies and the 10th Doctor retrospective. And our first feedback comes from Jamie J40 on YouTube, who wrote, female opinion, but Rose is the best companion. She's the bad wolf in the interface of the moment from the Day of the Doctor. She connected with the Doctor's loneliness when he thinks he's destroyed his planet and all his people. They're quite bonded and seem to be having fun, even when they're in danger. The 10th Doctor gets a lot more prickly after he loses her. I enjoy New Who, but I'm particularly emotional about the Russell T. Davies era. I can't believe you gremlins don't like Dalek and Father's Day. What? I don't think we said we didn't like it. It just weren't in our favorites.
I don't dislike them. Yeah.
Actually, I was going to say, I don't think any of us ever pointed them out as dislikes. They just weren't on our likes list either.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, I like the father elements, Rose's father elements with Father's Day.
Yeah.
I might have said Father's Day, as I recall now. I can't remember for sure.
I actually I like a lot of what happens in Father's Day. I don't like the flying creepy pterodactyl things. I think the CGI is and that visualization for what happens in a time paradox is not my favorite. But I actually love getting to meet Pete, Rose's father, and watch his personal story arc.
Yes, I agree. I think that was a great addition, and good that they brought him back. She also says that I'd offer that David Tennant's Doctor is like Tom Baker, and Matt Smith is the one who's more like Patrick Troughton.
No, I agree.
I think that's clear. You nailed it about Russell T. Davies' time. It's about character. Moffat's a storyteller. I've enjoyed his Doctors, including Capaldi, but not the same amount of emotion involved. Thank you, Jamie. That's good. Amy Flowers writes on Facebook, look out for the hate mail, Jimmy, in the less than positive talk on Rose. And for the record, I don't disagree with you, she says. So,
no. And I don't mind Rose. It's just I don't think she's the bee's knees.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of love for Rose because of the love story aspect of it. I think that plays into it. For the best and worst, should Moffat's episodes be considered in a Russell T. Davies perspective? Retrospective?
Well, I mean, if he hadn't gone on to become showrunner, that would be the only place to consider them.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like everybody else who didn't become showrunner later, well, they were part of the Russell T. Davies era.
Yeah, I think Davies, he's the one who gives script approval. He's He's the oversight. So, we're not just considering ones he wrote.
And most of those stories, when Russell T. Davies or when Moffat wrote them, he had no idea he was going to become the showrunner.
Yeah.
So I mean that would have been a decision probably made in the last season before he took over. So
yeah. She adds that Stephen Moffat's an amazing writer for one-off stories, but I found his seasons lacking. But that's a different discussion, which we will have at the end of his time. Which we did have at the end of his time, actually. She said, I find Blink to be overrated. And then she says, listen to your episode discussing it. You wave away all the plot holes because it's Blink.
I'd have to re-listen to it and see if we wave away plot holes because it's Blink.
Yeah, I'd have to re-listen myself. I think I enjoyed it despite plot holes. That were there.
I think that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Moffat, plot holes is a lot. He's not great at plugging all the holes. I'll acknowledge that.
What I know is when I do use Blink as one of my intro to Doctor Who episodes for people, and I have yet to have anyone who is not impressed by it. Even people who don't normally like science fiction, they like Blink. Right. And there are certain moments where, like in Blink, Sally Sparrow, like we mentioned the elder Billy Shipton when he dies.
Yes.
We have that very touching moment in the hospital, and he knows his life is going to last as long as the rain, and we see the rain falling, and then the rain stops, and we see Sally Sparrow standing there in his hospital room, and she's still with him, and then the music starts thumping, and she's resolved, and we're off, and it's like this really great emotional turning point that even carries the music itself is carrying it at that point. And there's just a lot. I think there's a lot to love about Blink, despite whatever plot holes there may be.
Right. So for her favorites, she says her favorite two are Eccleston. Favorite two of Eccleston's time are Dalek and Bad Wolf / Parting of the Ways. Top 5 for Tenet are Partners in Crime, Human Nature, Family of Blood, which is one, Fires of Pompeii, The Girl in the Fireplace, and The Unicorn and the Wasp. Those are all good. I think that, I wouldn't have put Unicorn and the Wasp.
Unicorn and the Wasp, but the others,
there were elements of Unicorn and the Wasp that I liked, but yeah.
There's elements of almost everything.
That's true. It is Doctor Who. We do love Doctor Who. There's a few things we don't like, which she's about to tell us, because the bottom two for Eccleston are Aliens of New York and World War III.
Yeah,
and
totally
The Long
agree.
Game. Yeah, the Long Game was also the Farty creatures, which I can never remember their long name.
Were the
was that the Long Game?
I don't think so. The Long Game is the one where, if I'm remembering correctly, is the one that's set on Satellite 5, where they have all the game shows, including the Ann Droid.
Oh, yes, the really terrible puns.
And the house guest show, and the clothing show, makeover show for Captain Jack, and the Weakest Link, and all that.
Yeah.
And that's where Adam got kicked out because he decided to get the hole in his head.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's also the one with guest starring
Simon Pegg.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, and that horrible creature on the ceiling.
yes. Yeah. Okay. I'm with you on that one, Amy. And then her bottom 5 for Tenet are Daleks in Manhattan / Evolution of the Daleks.
Agree.
Daleks Take Manhattan, as they call it. Tooth and Claw. I agree. Fear Her. That's in my book.
It's the Scribbles episode.
Yeah. Last of the Time Lords. Interesting that you picked that one. And
I'm sympathetic to that, because I really hate what they do with the Toclafane and the Master being so Daffy Duck in that episode.
Yep.
Yeah. And the Lazarus Experiment. Which
that's the one with Mark Gatiss becomes the giant bug from Men in Black.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I think those are fair lists. I'd say so.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amy, for that. Bennett Gillespie writes on Facebook, personally, I'm grateful to Mr. Davies for giving me a touch point with my daughter, born in 2000, and my son, born in 2005. A shared delight in the same TV program is a simple joy.
Yeah,
I agree.
That's a very good thing.
He says, I found the whole Donna's story arc, especially with how it ended and the close of Tennant's story, to be very effective and moving. I'd also agree. All your top 5s and bottom 5s are great choices. Thank you for the joy you guys bring to the pod. Thank you, Bennett. Appreciate that. Then finally, Jason Thayer writes on Facebook, I have an idea. I think each time you end an era in Classic Who, you should have a retrospective on it, just like you did with this. Tell us your favorite and worst episodes. Oh, and Dom, you should tell us if your rankings change. I'm not sure exactly what he meant, but if as we go through it, if my rankings change.
Well, probably I would guess like rankings of doctors and rankings of companions and things like that. Kind of
or episodes.
Or episodes too.
We might find like, ooh, we like this episode at the time, but once you see it in the overall context of its era, maybe not so much.
That's true. It's kind of tough to do a retrospective for each Doctor as we finish, because we're probably going to finish all of them around the same time, because the way we're going through them, we're kind of trying to go through them methodically so that we end them around the same time. But
we could potentially, do retrospectives for the Classic Who producers. Like we just started on the Philip Hinchcliffe era, and so at some point we could talk about, the end of the Philip Hinchcliffe era, which then begins the John Nathan Turner era.
Oh, boy.
I can already see predictions of what our conversation is going to be like.
All I can say, though, Jimmy, is you reminded me that thanks to John Nathan Turner, we did get number 5, so...
Mm-hmm.
there is good aspects to the JNT era.
Yes, we got number 5, and we also got Chameleon, and we got Adric, and a number of other things.
Yep,
weigh them in the balance. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your feedback. We do love to get feedback from our listeners. So we do want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Doctor Who, including David J., Chris E., James S., Jonathan H., and Ryan Z. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edits the show for us every week. So that's it from us. What did you think of the 4th Doctor story, Planet of Evil? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 11th Doctor story, The Time of the Angels. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thank you, Dom.
And Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, you and I are scientists, Professor. We buy our privilege to experiment at the cost of total responsibility.
Right. This is going to be fun.